the morning of March 9, 1945, arrived over Guam with the kind of humidity that made flight suits stick to skin before the sun even cleared the horizon. Captain James "Jim" Pearson stood beneath the shadow of his B-29 Superfortress, a machine so massive it seemed to defy the laws of physics every time it lifted off the coral runway. The Boeing B-29 was America's most advanced bomber, a four-engine Titan capable of carrying 10 tons of ordnance across thousands of miles of open Pacific. But it was also temperamental, complex, and unforgiving. Pearson's aircraft, designated as City of Los Angeles, bore the scars of 12 previous missions over Japan. Bullet holes patched with aluminum, scorched paint from flak bursts, and oil stains that never quite washed clean. His crew of 11 men, bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, radio operator, radar operator, and 6 gunners, had learned to trust the big bird despite its quirks. The Wright R-3350 engines were notorious for overheating, catching fire, and failing at the worst possible moments. Ground crews joked darkly that the B-29 stood for 29 Reasons Not to Fly. But tonight's mission was critical. Tokyo, the heart of the Japanese Empire. Intelligence indicated that shifting winds would allow for a devastating low-altitude incendiary attack on the capital's industrial districts. 334 B-29s would participate in Operation Meeting House, the largest firebombing raid in history. Each aircraft would carry a maximum fuel load and nearly 7 tons of M69 incendiary cluster bombs, weapons designed to create firestorms that no amount of water could extinguish. Pearson walked around his aircraft during the pre-flight inspection, running his hand along the cold aluminum skin. His flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, was already deep inside the forward wheel well, checking hydraulic lines with a flashlight. The nose gear, a critical component that allowed the B-29 to taxi, take off, and most importantly, land, consisted of twin wheels mounted on a complex retraction mechanism. When the gear retracted after takeoff, it folded upward into a compartment directly beneath the bombardier's station. Hydraulic pressure held it in place. Backup systems existed, but they were mechanical, manual, and required perfect timing. "How's she looking, Mike?" Pearson called up. Kowalski's voice echoed from inside the wheel well. "Hydraulic fluids topped off, Captain. Pressure's good. Lines look clean. Good. I don't want any surprises tonight." The briefing had been unusually tense. The mission commander, a bird colonel with hollow eyes, had emphasized the importance of maintaining formation and hitting the target precisely. Tokyo's wooden structures would burn if the incendiaries landed in the right concentration. Weather over Japan was expected to be clear, a bomber pilot's dream and nightmare simultaneously. Clear skies meant accurate bombing, but also made them visible to every Japanese fighter and anti-aircraft battery between the coast and the capital. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. Ground crews swarmed over the aircraft, loading bombs into the cavernous belly, topping off fuel tanks, checking oxygen systems, testing radios. Pearson gathered his crew near the nose wheel for a final word. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach, "this is our 13th mission. Some of you might think that's unlucky. I think it means we're getting good at this." A few nervous laughs. "We go in low tonight. 5,000 feet. That puts us in range of everything the Japanese can throw at us. Small arms, machine guns, light flak. But it also means we can see what we're hitting. We drop our load, we come home. Simple. Nothing about flying a B-29 into the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific was simple, and every man there knew it. By 1700 hours, the pre-flight checklist was complete. Pearson climbed through the forward hatch and settled into the left seat of the cockpit. His co-pilot, First Lieutenant Robert Chun, took the right seat. The instrument panel spread before them like the control room of a power plant. Gauges, switches, levers, and dials monitoring every system on the aircraft. Engine temperatures, fuel flow, hydraulic pressure, oxygen levels, electrical systems. One moment of inattention could kill them all. "Starting number 1, Pearson announced. The ground crew chief gave the signal. Pearson engaged the starter for the number 1 engine, the inboard engine on the left wing. The massive propeller began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. White smoke puffed from the exhaust as the 18-cylinder radial engine coughed to life. The sound was deafening even through the cockpit walls. One by one, all 4 engines roared to life, their combined 8,800 horsepower shaking the entire airframe. Pearson tested the controls. Ailerons, elevators, rudder, all responding. He checked the landing gear lever, verifying it was in the down and locked position. 3 green lights confirmed all 3 gear assemblies were secure. At 18:15 hours, the tower gave clearance. Pearson released the brakes and pushed the throttles forward. The city of Los Angeles began to roll, 65 tons of metal, fuel, and explosives accelerating down the coral runway. The nose gear rattled over every imperfection in the surface. At 120 miles per hour, Pearson pulled back on the yoke. The bomber lifted off, the nose gear leaving the ground last. "Gear up," Pearson ordered. Chen reached for the landing gear lever and pulled it to the retract position. Hydraulic pumps whined. The main gear, the massive wheels under the wings, folded upward smoothly. The red gear warning lights went out as they locked into position. But the nose gear light stayed red. Chan stared at the indicator. Nose gears not retracting. Pearson felt his stomach tighten. "How far up is it?" Kowalski's voice crackled over the intercom from his station behind the cockpit. "Captain, I'm getting a pressure drop in the forward hydraulic system. Nose gear's halfway up, but it's stuck." A nose gear that wouldn't retract meant several problems. The exposed wheels created drag, reducing speed and fuel efficiency. Worse, if it stayed partially extended, it could jam completely, making landing impossible. And worst of all, they had a 7-ton bomb load and 12 hours of flying ahead of them. Pearson keyed the radio. "Tower, City of Los Angeles. We have a nose gear malfunction. Requesting permission to abort and return for landing." The response came immediately. "Negative, City of Los Angeles. Mission Priority Alpha. Continue to target. Address malfunction en route." Pearson and Chen exchanged glances. The mission was too important. 300 bombers converging on Tokyo couldn't afford gaps in the formation. One abort might seem insignificant, but it would leave a hole that disrupted the entire attack pattern. "Copy, Tower. Continuing mission." Pearson banked the bomber into a climbing turn, joining the stream of B-29s heading northwest toward Japan. The sun was setting behind them, painting the Pacific in shades of orange and red. Ahead lay 1,500 miles of open ocean, then the Japanese home islands, then the most dangerous 4 hours any of them would ever experience. The nose gear dangled beneath them like a broken tooth, visible to everyone in the formation. Other pilots radioed concerned messages. Pearson acknowledged them all with forced confidence. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, the city of Los Angeles climbed toward its cruising altitude of 18,000 feet. But the partially extended nose gear created so much drag that Pearson had to keep the throttles pushed further forward than normal, burning precious fuel. Kowalski worked frantically, trying every emergency procedure in the manual. Cycling the hydraulic system. Engaging the manual backup crank. Bleeding air from the lines. Nothing worked. The nose gear remained frozen in a partially retracted position, neither up nor down, locked or free. "Captain," Kowalski finally reported, his voice tight with frustration, "I can't get it to move. The hydraulic actuators either jammed or broken. The manual backup isn't engaging. We're stuck like this." Pearson did the math in his head. Extra fuel burn from the drag. 1,400 miles to Tokyo. 1,400 miles back. The variables were grim. How long can we stay airborne? If we maintain current consumption, maybe 10 hours. 11 if we're lucky. The mission profile called for 12 hours minimum. They'd be cutting it dangerously close. Chen spoke quietly. We could still turn back. Pearson looked ahead at the stream of bombers stretching across the night sky, navigation lights blinking like a river of stars. Somewhere ahead, Tokyo waited. Somewhere behind them, Guam was disappearing below the horizon. No, Pearson said finally. We press on. We didn't come this far to turn back because of a stuck wheel. The decision was made. The city of Los Angeles would fly into combat with a crippled nose gear, carrying enough explosives to level a city block, knowing that even if they survived the Japanese defenses, they'd have to attempt a landing that might tear the aircraft apart on impact. The night closed around them, and Japan grew closer with every passing minute. The Pacific stretched beneath them like a vast black void, broken only by occasional whitecaps reflecting starlight. Inside the city of Los Angeles, 11 men settled into the uncomfortable routine of a long-range bombing mission. The temperature at 18,000 feet hovered near -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite heated flight suits, the cold seeped into bones and made every movement stiff and deliberate. Pearson maintained his position in the bomber stream, following the lead aircraft's navigation lights. Radio discipline was absolute, no unnecessary chatter that might alert Japanese listening posts. The only sounds were the relentless drone of 4 R-3350 engines, the whistle of wind through the partially extended nose gear, and the occasional crackle of the intercom. Every 30 minutes, Kowalski provided fuel consumption reports. Each one was worse than the last. Captain, we're burning fuel 20% faster than planned. At this rate, we'll hit bingo fuel before we reach Guam on the return leg. Bingo fuel, the point of no return. The moment when there wasn't enough fuel to reach any safe landing site. First Lieutenant David Morrison, the navigator, worked frantically at his station behind the cockpit, recalculating routes on his charts with a penlight clenched between his teeth. If we reduce altitude after the bomb run, we might save fuel. Lower altitude means denser air, more efficient engine performance. It also means we'll be in range of every trigger-happy gunner from Tokyo to the coast, Chen pointed out. We don't have a choice, Pearson said flatly. After we drop, we go low and we go fast. We'll worry about fighters when we have to. Hours passed. The men rotated positions, trying to stay alert despite fatigue and cold. The gunners, positioned in remote-controlled turrets and manual stations throughout the aircraft, constantly scanned the darkness for night fighters. Japanese Ki-45 Nick interceptors were known to hunt B-29s at night, their crews trained to approach from below where the bombers had limited defensive fire. Staff Sergeant Tommy Chen, the tail gunner isolated in his lonely station at the rear of the aircraft, reported first. Movement at 5 o'clock low. Could be a fighter. Every man tensed. Pearson's hands tightened on the yoke. All gunners, stay sharp. Don't fire unless you have positive identification. We can't afford to give away our position. The shadow disappeared. False alarm. Probably another B-29 passing beneath them. At 23:45 hours, Morrison's voice came through calm and professional. Captain, we're approaching the Japanese coast. Landfall in 15 minutes. Pearson felt his heart rate increase. This was the moment when theory became reality. Behind them, the vast safety of the Pacific. Ahead, an empire fighting for its survival with desperate ferocity. All stations, this is the captain. We're going in. Check your oxygen. Check your weapons. Bombardier, prepare for bomb run. Second Lieutenant Frank Sullivan, the bombardier positioned in the nose of the aircraft directly above the jammed nose gear, acknowledged. Sullivan had the most dangerous job on the bomber, lying prone in the transparent nose section, completely exposed, guiding the aircraft during the critical minutes when they were most vulnerable. Tonight, he'd also be directly above landing gear that might collapse and crush him if things went wrong. The Japanese coast materialized out of darkness, a thin line of lights despite blackout orders, betraying the presence of fishing villages and coastal defense stations. Almost immediately, searchlights snapped on, brilliant white beams sweeping the sky. The lead aircraft began weaving, making it harder for the lights to lock on. Then the flak started. Anti-aircraft guns positioned along the coast opened fire, sending 75mm and 88mm shells arcing upward. The shells were timed to explode at specific altitudes, creating deadly clouds of shrapnel. Each detonation produced a bright orange flash followed by expanding black smoke. The sound reached them seconds later, dull thuds that felt like punches to the chest even through the aircraft's skin. Pearson had experienced flak before, but never this intense. The Japanese had clearly reinforced their coastal defenses. Shells burst all around them, some close enough that shrapnel pinged off the aluminum fuselage. "Damage report," Pearson called. Stations checked in one by one. No serious hits yet, but the bombardment was only beginning. The bomber stream pressed inland, overflying darkened towns and cities. Below, Japan's home island stretched out in the moonlight, mountains, rivers, farmland, and urban centers all waiting beneath them. The defensive fire intensified. Searchlights crisscrossed the sky, occasionally catching a B-29 in their beams. When they did, every anti-aircraft battery within range would focus on that single aircraft, hammering it with concentrated fire until it either escaped the lights or went down in flames. Morrison guided them toward the IP, the initial point where they'd begin their final approach to Tokyo. The plan called for the bombers to descend to just 5,000 feet, a shockingly low altitude that would maximize the effectiveness of the incendiary bombs but also expose them to every weapon in the Japanese arsenal. IP in 5 minutes, Morrison announced. Turning to heading 270. Pearson banked the aircraft, following the lead bomber. The formation was beginning to break up slightly as aircraft separated to approach the target from different directions. This was by design. A concentrated attack from multiple vectors would overwhelm Tokyo's defenses. "Beginning descent," Pearson said, pulling back on the throttles and pushing the yoke forward. The city of Los Angeles's nose dropped, and they began losing altitude rapidly. The airspeed indicator climbed as they descended, 200 miles per hour, 220, 240. The jammed nose gear shuddered violently in the increased airflow. Kowalski watched it through a small window, his face pressed against the cold glass. "Captain, the nose gear's taking a beating. The strut is vibrating badly. If it breaks free, it could damage the bomb bay doors or tear through the fuselage." "Can you secure it?" "Not from here. I'd have to go outside," which was impossible at 240 miles per hour over enemy territory. Pearson made a decision. "We'll deal with it after the drop. Right now, we finish this mission." At 8,000 feet, they broke through a thin cloud layer. Below them, Tokyo spread out like a glittering map. Despite blackout regulations, the city was impossible to hide. Rivers reflected moonlight. Streets formed distinct patterns. And in the distance, fires were already burning where the lead bombers had dropped their loads. "Target area at 12 o'clock, Sullivan reported from the nose. "I have visual on the aiming point. Bomb bay doors opening." The massive doors beneath the fuselage swung open, creating even more drag. The aircraft shuddered. Pearson fought to maintain altitude and heading as wind buffeted them through the open bay. They descended through 7,000 feet. 6,000. The city rose up to meet them. Pearson could see individual buildings now, streets, parks. And he could see the fires spreading. Dozens of fires, then hundreds, merging into larger conflagrations that cast an orange glow over entire neighborhoods. The heat from the fires below created turbulence that tossed the bomber like a toy. Pearson wrestled with the controls, trying to keep the aircraft steady. Sullivan needed a stable platform for accurate bombing. At 5,000 feet, they leveled off. They were now within range of everything: heavy machine guns, 20mm cannons, even small arms fire. Tracers began streaming up from below, green and red lines of light that seemed to move slowly until they flashed past at hundreds of miles per hour. Some came so close that Pearson could see individual rounds zipping past the cockpit windows. A burst of flak exploded directly ahead, close enough that Pearson instinctively ducked. Shrapnel hammered the nose section. Sullivan grunted but stayed at his position. I pressed to the Norden bomb sight. "Steady, steady." Sullivan's voice was calm despite the chaos. "Bomb doors are open. Target locked. 10 seconds. Pearson held the aircraft straight and level, every instinct screaming at him to take evasive action. They were sitting ducks. Another flak burst rocked them, this one beneath the left wing. The number 2 engine coughed, and the RPM gauge fluctuated wildly. "Number 2's been hit," Chan called out. "Oil pressure dropping." "Keep it running," Pearson ordered. "Just 10 more seconds." 5 seconds, Sullivan counted. 3, 2, 1, bombs away. The city of Los Angeles lurched upward as 7 tons of M69 incendiary clusters fell free. Each cluster contained dozens of smaller bomblets that would separate at a predetermined altitude, scattering across a wide area. When they hit, they'd burst open, spraying jellied gasoline that stuck to everything it touched and burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. "Bomb bay doors closing," Sullivan reported. "We're clear." Pearson immediately pushed the throttles to full power and threw the bomber into a steep banking turn, heading for the coast. Below, their bombs added to the growing inferno. Entire city blocks were now engulfed in flames. The firestorm was creating its own weather, massive updrafts that pulled in surrounding air, feeding the flames with hurricane-force winds. But they weren't safe yet. The partially jammed nose gear, which had survived the outbound flight and the bomb run, was about to face its greatest test. "Captain," Kowalski's voice was urgent. "The nose gear strut just shifted. It's hanging by the backup latch. If that fails..." "How long until it fails?" "I don't know. Minutes? Hours? It could go any second." Pearson glanced at the fuel gauges. They had just enough fuel to make it back to Guam if nothing else went wrong. But if the nose gear broke free, the sudden shift in weight and aerodynamics could make the aircraft unflyable. Or worse, the gear could tumble backward through the bomb bay, rupturing fuel lines and tearing open the fuselage. "All crew, listen up," Pearson announced over the intercom. "We have a situation. The nose gear is about to fail. If it breaks loose, we might lose control. I need everyone to secure loose equipment and prepare for emergency bailout. Kowalski, stand by the escape hatch. If I give the word, you get everyone out in 30 seconds. "Understood, Captain." They climbed away from Tokyo, pursued by searchlights and flak. The sky behind them glowed orange and red, smoke rising in massive columns that were visible for 100 miles. Operation Meeting House was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. But success meant nothing if they couldn't get home. The number 2 engine was still struggling, temperature climbing into the red zone. The nose gear continued vibrating, the backup latch groaning under stress it was never designed to handle. And ahead of them lay 1,400 miles of ocean with fuel reserves that were dropping toward critical. Chan stared at the gauges, then at Pearson. "Even if the gear holds and we make it to Guam, how do we land with the nose gear jammed?" Pearson had been asking himself the same question. Landing a B-29 without a functioning nose gear meant a belly landing, or more accurately, a nose-down crash that would almost certainly kill the bombardier and navigator in the forward section. The impact forces would be catastrophic. The aircraft would cartwheel, break apart, and probably explode. "We'll figure it out when we get there," Pearson said. "First, We have to survive the next 12 hours. The Japanese coast passed beneath them, defensive fire pursuing them out to sea. They'd made it through the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific. They'd dropped their bombs on target. They'd survived fighters, flak, and fire. But the hardest part was still ahead. The Pacific darkness swallowed them as they left the burning coast of Japan behind. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the engines and the whistle of wind through the damaged nose gear. Then reality set in. "Captain, number 2 engine temperature is critical," Chen announced, tapping the gauge as if that might change the reading. "We need to shut it down before it seizes or catches fire." Pearson nodded grimly. "Shut it down. Feather the prop." Chen pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff and hit the feathering button. The number 2 propeller gradually rotated its blade's edge on to the wind, reducing drag. The engine coughed once, twice, then went silent. The sudden asymmetric thrust tried to pull them into a banking turn, but Pearson compensated with rudder pressure. Flying on 3 engines with a jammed nose gear meant burning even more fuel. Morrison recalculated their range constantly, each computation more pessimistic than the last. "Captain, at current fuel consumption, we'll be approximately 80 miles short of Guam." 80 miles. Over open Pacific. At night. With no rescue assets in range. Kowalski voiced what everyone was thinking. Iwo Jima. It's closer. Iwo Jima, the volcanic island halfway between Japan and the Marianas that Marines had captured only weeks earlier at horrific cost. The airfield there had been built specifically for emergency landings by damaged B-29s. It was their only option. "Navigator, plot a course for Iwo Jima," Pearson ordered. "Radio, send a message. Tell them we're inbound with mechanical failure and battle damage. We'll need the full length of the runway and all available emergency equipment." Technical Sergeant Ray Martinez, the radio operator, began transmitting. But before he could finish, his voice turned urgent. "Captain, I'm picking up multiple contacts on radar. Bearing 040, range 30 miles, closing fast." Night fighters. The Japanese weren't done with them yet. "All gunners, weapons free." Pearson called. "Target anything that comes within range." The B-29's defensive armament consisted of 12.50 caliber machine guns mounted in 4 remote-controlled turrets plus a tail position. On paper, it was formidable. In practice, hitting a fast-moving fighter at night was nearly impossible. The radar contacts closed rapidly. Then Staff Sergeant Tommy Chan in the tail position saw them first, 3 dark shapes silhouetted against the stars, climbing toward them from below and behind. Fighters, 6 o'clock low, 800 yards. Tommy called out. The Japanese pilots were good. They approached from the bomber's blind spot, climbing slowly to avoid detection, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 700 yards, 600, they're splitting up. Pearson couldn't take evasive action, not with 3 engines and a jammed nose gear that might break free at any moment. All he could do was hold course and hope his gunners could drive off the attackers. The fighters opened fire simultaneously. 20 mm cannon shells and 7.7 mm machine gun rounds streamed toward the city of Los Angeles. The gunners returned fire, .50 caliber tracers creating ribbons of light in the darkness. 1 fighter pressed in close, too close. Tommy Chan tracked it perfectly, his 4.50 calories hammering out a combined 2,000 rounds per minute. The fighter erupted in flames and spun away, trailing fire. "Splash 1!" Tommy shouted. But the other 2 fighters weren't deterred. They came in from different angles, forcing the gunners to split their attention. Cannon shells slammed into the left wing, punching through aluminum skin and severing hydraulic lines. The number 1 engine caught fire. "Fire in number 1!" Chen yelled from the cockpit. Pearson didn't hesitate. "Activate fire suppression system." Shut down number 1. Chen hit the fire extinguisher button, releasing halon gas into the engine nacelle, then shut down the fuel and ignition. The flames died, but now they were down to 2 engines, both on the right wing. The asymmetric thrust made the aircraft want to roll left constantly. Pearson had to push the yoke right and hold constant right rudder just to maintain level flight. "We can't take much more of this," Chen said through gritted teeth, muscles straining. The fighters made another pass. This time, shells struck the fuselage near the waist gunner positions. One of the gunners, Sergeant Bill Jackson, screamed over the intercom, "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Kowalski immediately went aft, crawling through the pressurized tunnel that connected the forward and rear sections. He found Jackson slumped over his gun, blood spreading across his flight suit from a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. "Stay with me, Bill," Kowalski shouted over the wind howling through bullet holes. He pulled Jackson away from the gun and applied pressure to the wound with a first aid kit. The bleeding was bad but not immediately fatal if he could get it under control. Meanwhile, the fighters regrouped for another attack. But they'd underestimated the bombers' defenses. As they closed in, every remaining gunner opened fire simultaneously, creating a wall of lead that filled the sky. One fighter took multiple hits and limped away trailing smoke. The third broke off the attack and disappeared into the darkness. Silence returned, broken only by the labored roar of 2 struggling engines and Jackson's pained breathing. "Damage report," Pearson ordered. The reports came in one by one. 2 engines out. Multiple hydraulic systems damaged. Structural damage to the left wing. 1 gunner wounded. And the nose gear still jammed in its half-extended position, now visibly worse. The strut bent at an angle that made it clear landing would be catastrophic. Morrison recalculated again. "Iwo Jima in 90 minutes. We should have enough fuel if nothing else goes wrong." That was a big if.